Hello Year 6, it's really nice to see you. I'm sorry that we're not in the classroom, we're back to virtual school, but it's good to be doing some RE with you, and it's a new topic this half term. We are looking at this question: how are Christians different around the world? And that question is really important. There are so many different types of Christianity. Churches in Peru, Catholic churches, are so different from mega Protestant churches in Korea to Church of England churches here in England. Even within London, there's a huge variety of different types of Christianity going on. So if we're teaching you about Christian beliefs, Christian practices, Christian values, there is this question of actually how different are the different types of Christianity, and that's what we're going to explore. So the first two lessons are looking at the question of Catholicism and Protestantism in Britain, and then the last two lessons, or the two lessons after the first writing lesson, are looking at this question of Pentecostalism, which is found in like Africa and Asia, but a lot in London as well, and liberation theology, which comes from South America and influenced Oscar Romero, who we looked at last half term. Okay, what is the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism in Britain? Have you heard of either of those terms? You might even come from a Catholic family or a Protestant family yourself, so maybe you know a lot about this, but we are going to start from the basics. Although Christianity did begin with one person, who was Jesus Christ, over the first millennium it's split into two, and this is something that we'll look at next lesson when we start to look at the history of these splits. But it's split into Catholic in Western Europe and Orthodox in Eastern Europe and Russia. And then there was another split that happened 500 years later in the 1500s, and that was the split that created Protestantism, and that kind of broadly came off from Catholicism. And again, we'll look at all of that next lesson in detail, but what you need to know is these are called different denominations of Christianity. So Roman Catholics are one denomination. Protestantism actually has lots and lots of different denominations within it. So you've got Methodism, Quakers, Church of England, Baptists, all sorts of different denominations, and the same Orthodox has different areas. So there's Syrian Orthodox, Egyptian Orthodox, Cypriot Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian, all sorts. So, what are the differences between Protestant and Catholic? There are some differences with the way that they worship and what they believe. If we were in person, I'd ask you if you knew any of the differences yourself. So, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but let's find out. Let's go for this basic look at the Catholic Church to start with, and then we'll look at the Protestant Church. So around 1 in 5 Christians in the UK are Roman Catholic, and this is a number that has been going up ever since the 19th century. It used to be that actually you couldn't even be Catholic in the UK without being persecuted, which means being treated badly for your beliefs. They would take away your land, they would not allow you to worship. That was sort of from the 1600s all the way to the 1800s. Nowadays, of course, you can worship as a Catholic, and actually it's increasing in number. There are more Catholics now than there were 50 years ago, mostly because Catholicism is really popular in countries like Poland and Lithuania and Hungary and the Czech Republic and all these Central and Eastern European countries. And lots of people have moved from those countries to England and to the UK over the last few years. And it's also really popular in Scotland and in Ireland as well. And so those populations have been increasing. And you might recognise this guy. This is Pope Francis. He is the leader of the Catholic Church. This is the flag of the Vatican City. I'll just move that out of my way so you can see it, which you might recognise. And I know, Elijah especially, you're going to know the smallest country in the world, the Vatican City, and that's inside the city of Rome. It's about as big as the city of London, not the whole of London, but just the tiny little city of London, and it's where the Catholic Church is based. You might sometimes hear it called the Vatican or the Vatican Church. And Roman Catholics have very liturgical worship, and what that means is they follow a very traditional form of worship. They sometimes even say their prayers in Latin, this ancient language. Not so much now as in the past, but it's still common. You can find churches in London that do that. When they do have a service, it's called Mass, with a capital M, M-A-S-S, and that's where they have the bread and the wine that we've looked at previously. And they will say the same prayers every single Sunday in churches all over the world in different languages, but the same words. And they use candles, they use incense in their services, so they're quite dramatic. And what we'll do now is we'll have a quick look. We're going to flick back and forth through some of those services. So or at least through one of those services. This was a mass that was held in Westminster Cathedral, a building we're going to look at in a moment. It was for Pope Benedict when he came to visit the UK a couple of years ago. He was the Pope before Francis. So let's just watch and make a note and have a think about what this looks like and what you're noticing.
Vincentio, Episcopo huius Ecclesiae, et omnibus orthodoxis atque catholici et apostolici.
So hopefully you noticed, quite traditional. The Pope was actually speaking in Latin there. He was giving out the wafer, the bread in the communion service to the choir boys. Everyone was wearing very traditional looking robes, and at the end he was out on the steps waving to lots of Catholic people who'd gone to visit him in London. So that's Catholic Mass. Now, Westminster Cathedral is amazing. If you ever get a chance to visit, absolutely do. It's near Victoria Station, and you can just step in and see what it's like. It was built fairly recently in the last 200 years because, as I say, Catholics weren't allowed to worship and have their religion officially be part of the UK. And worship officially in the UK. So they had to build all these churches in the 19th century. Let's go and have a look at the inside of this. So this is Westminster Cathedral. And what you will notice is just how heavily decorated it is. So everywhere you look, there is marble, there is gold, there are candles, there are these chandeliers with lights on them, all these different patterns. Here on the altar, you've got these candles, you've got the cross, which represents Jesus, you've got the Chi Rho, the X, well, it's not the X, the Chi and the Rho, the Greek letters that represent the name Jesus Christ in Greek. You've got this sort of arch over the altar protecting the altar, and here we go, this is Jesus Christ himself in the form of a mosaic. You've got all of this gold, you've got these angels and saints, and yeah, just everything. It's a lot. Roman churches are really stunning. They put a lot of thought into the decoration that they have, and that's an important part of their worship for them. And some Church of England churches are like this, and some aren't. Some Baptist churches, some Methodist churches are very different, and churches that you've been inside might be very different to this church. If you go inside St George the Martyr in Borough, it doesn't look like this, but there are some similarities. You'll always find a cross, you'll always find an altar, which is the table here at the front. Usually some sort of candles to represent light. Okay, so speaking of the Church of England, around 30% of Christians in the UK are members of the Church of England. It's a Protestant church, and we'll find out why next lesson. The leader of the Church of England is the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's currently this man, Justin Welby. And Justin Welby takes over from Rowan Williams, but the actual head of the church is the Queen. And the Queen has always been the head of the church ever since King Henry VIII. Again, we'll talk about that next lesson. This is Canterbury Cathedral, which is in Kent. Beautiful city, beautiful cathedral, and it's kind of the seat of power for the Archbishop of Canterbury for the Church of England. And the Church of England is part of a whole collection of churches globally that are a denomination within Protestantism called Anglican churches. And they have lots of different types of worship. Anglican worship is really broad. You can go to churches that are very, very, very different. Some are what's called low church. You've got band, you've got guitars, drums, big TV screens. They're often recorded even before COVID. They have rock music or pop music. They have not really so many set prayers, not so much traditional service. People stand up, people wave about. It's very interesting, very modern form of worship. And then you've got high church, which is a lot more like Catholic in what kind of worship it is. And that's where you've got incense and candles and traditional worship. And all of that's within the Church of England. All of that is contained within this church in England and elsewhere in the Anglican Church. And we can look at what these two services look like now. So this is a funeral service using the Book of Common Prayer, which is a very traditional form of English worship. So if we just listen quickly, you can see this is quite a different looking church. It's a much older church than Westminster Cathedral.
Shortly
to accomplish the number of thine elect, and to hasten thy kingdom, that we, with all those that are departed, in the true faith of thy holy name, shut not thy merciful ears to our prayer, but spare us, Lord most holy.
And so that's a very traditional service. So the words that they're using were written 400 years ago, but it's very common in the Church of England for funeral services to be quite traditional. And then this is a video from within the COVID pandemic, but it's celebrating Pentecost, which we'll actually talk more about in a couple of lessons' time. But let's see if we can spot some of the differences between this and the much more traditional Catholic worship that we were looking at. This is John Sentamu, who used to be the Bishop of York, the Archbishop of York, sorry, the second most important person in Anglicanism. Come on.
The riches of Christ are inexhaustible. We should
They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship,
to the breaking of bread together,
So there we go, you can see that's a less traditional service, it's more of a low church service. Even though they're not in a church, it's online. You've got modern music, you've got people dressed in more modern clothes, they're not wearing the robes and things like that, and they're not following a set pattern of worship. So the big differences between Catholic and Catholic and Protestant, sorry, in Church of England. Catholics have the Pope as their leader in the Vatican City. They have very traditional services, sometimes said in Latin. Protestant Church of England Christians have the Archbishop of Canterbury as their leader and the Queen as the head of the church. They have a whole range of services from low church to high church. Some look very similar to Catholic services, some don't. And they are, yes, I suppose that's the two main differences. Some very similar parts of their worship, some very different. Next lesson, we're going to look at how that split came about, something called the Reformation. I will see you then. Don't forget to fill in your booklet for today's lesson. Have a wonderful week, and I will speak to you soon. Bye-bye.